Hello and welcome to my tutorial on building a simple CRUD application with PHP and MySQL. So in this tutorial, we'll be building an application using vanilla PHP, which you will have to connect to a database and perform some simple standard database functionality. So what do we need to do to get started? The first thing is that we need to have PHP installed on your machine or wherever you're doing your development. And we're going to need the MySQL I extension. This is what we're going to use to actually connect to a database. It's a driver that gets installed with PHP so that we can connect to the database and do all of our database interaction. You're going to need MySQL Database installed on your machine as well. This is it doesn't necessarily have to be on your machine, but it's probably easier to get it, download it from MySQL and have it installed on your machine. You're going to need to know the credentials to get into it, specifically username and password, and the URL to get into the database. Without the database, kind of makes things a little harder. One other thing that I like to use, not necessarily you have to use, is the MySQL Workbench, which you can find on the MySQL site. This is a nice tool for doing all the interactions between the database, like creating new schemas, creating tables, and things like that. And we'll go over some of that in this tutorial as well. You're going to need something like Visual Studio Code or some sort of editor. I like to use Visual Studio Code because it's got a lot of extensions and helps you visualize your code a lot better than just a standard text editor. There's a lot of different other IDEs out there, integrated development environments, that you can use that will help you get kind of the same functionality you can get out of VS Code. VS Code is just nice because it's free. So what are we building? Well, we're building a simple CRUD application. But what is CRUD? Well, CRUD is actually an acronym. It stands for Create, Read, Update, Delete. And those are the four main functionality that you will do on your database. Those are the things that you will do the most. You'll be creating things, you'll be reading from your database, you'll be updating records, and you'll be deleting stuff. So we're going to go through all four of those on this particular application. So the project flow, and how are we going to be building this? Well, the first thing is we're going to go and we'll open up a command shell and create the directory structure. Then we will create a PHP page that will show you that PHP is running and show you that you have the right extensions installed on your machine. This is an important step here. We'll actually be using the built-in PHP web browser, so we won't have to run anything like Apache or Nginx. We're going to do this all local, and I'll show you how to get that up and running. We're going to create the database. So like I said, we're going to go into MySQL Workbench, and we'll create the schema, and we'll create the table. We're going to build out all the PHP pages. We're going to build the pages for viewing your items. We're going to build the pages for deleting, updating, and creating new items. Then we're going to connect all those pages up to the database and actually get it to function. Once we have it functioning, we're going to then test all the functionality in our page to make sure that you can create, you can update, you can delete, and you can read all the records that are in your table. So let's get started. All right, so now let's look at what we have to get installed on our machine to actually get it working, and so that we can get our environment up and running. So the first thing in here is PHP, and we just go to the php.net page and click on the download link, and you can download the latest version. And you're going to have to look for the version that runs on your machine. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to get things installed. If you're using a Mac, you can do things like through Brew or things like that. This is basically on the php.net page is the official downloads. So you'll see that here's some Linux versions, and you got Windows versions that you can go and look at. And you can follow the instructions here on how to get PHP up and running on your machine. And then also, you need to find the instructions on the PHP site here to get that MySQL extension running, which is actually pretty straightforward, but there is some extra steps in there to get that run. We're not really going to run through all of how to do that in this tutorial, just to try to keep this one brief. The next thing is to get the MySQL database. So you go to the MySQL site, mysql.com/downloads, and what we're looking for specifically is the community edition, which is down here, and that's going to give you the best. It give you basically a free version of MySQL to run local on your machine. And there are many different ways that you can have a database. So I'm not really going to cover on how to get this installed and things like that, but just let you know that they're pointing you in the direction of getting this particular community edition installed on your machine, and just following the instructions there. For Windows and Mac, it's a simple installer. For Linux, it's a little bit more difficult, but not too difficult. The other thing is the MySQL Workbench. So if you look here, we go to mysql.com/product/workbench, and we're going to be using this MySQL Workbench to actually just create the tables and get your first. Create the schema and get your first tables in there. One other thing we're going to use is Bootstrap for our CSS and design. And when we get into actually programming the web pages, we'll come back to the Bootstrap site, and I'll show you how to get that put onto your page so that you can use all the nice styling that Bootstrap has, because we don't want to spend a lot of time with styling when we can use a tool like this that really does a really good job at displaying data. So with that in mind, let's continue on to the next. Okay, so now we're going to create the directory structure for our project. And you can see here, I'm actually in my development/projects folder. You can put it anywhere on your machine that you want. You just need to remember where it is. And I'm going to create a directory. So we're going to create a directory that we're calling PHP CRUD. So we'll create that PHP CRUD directory, and then we're actually going to go into that PHP CRUD directory. Within this directory, we're going to actually create two different directories in here. We're going to call one public, and the public is where you want to have your pages that you're going to serve out, or your PHP files that you're going to serve out. You want to separate your public stuff from your non-public PHP files. You don't want those lingering around in a place that somebody could actually stumble on and run. Because, well, as I'll show you later, all you got to do is know the name of the file and the PHP extension. You can run anything that's sitting in that directory that's serving the files. So we create the public directory, and that's where we're going to create all the front end files for our application. We're also going to create an app directory, and this in the app directory, that's going to hold all the files, PHP files and things like that we don't want to be directly accessible from the public. So with that all in mind, I'm going to type in, if you're using VS Code, you can actually type in code and period, and that will open up VS Code and get you into the exact directory, open VS Code in the directory that you're currently in, so that we can actually start writing programs. All right, at this point, I'm expecting that you have PHP up and running. You also have your MySQL up and running, and you've created your directory structure. So now we're going to take a look at this. And if you see here in VS Code, I have the two folders over here. And there's nothing in each of these folders. So we're going to actually create our first file, and we're going to call it info.php. And this is going to create a PHP file. So we're going to create a very simple PHP application. It's actually only well, it's really only one line, but you always start your PHP programs with the less than question mark PHP. That lets PHP interpreter know that's where the start of the code is. And then we're going to do PHP info. Oops, PHP info. And this PHP info will display a page with a lot of information on what's running in your PHP instance. So let's take a look at that. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our terminal. So this is the integrated terminal inside of VS Code, which is also another nice thing to have while you're working. And we're going to actually get the internal PHP web server running, which is extremely simple. We're just going to type in PHP-S, which tells it, hey, use the internal server. We're going to call it on localhost, which is just a loopback to our machine. We're going to run it on port 8080. The -T says I want to serve out of the public directory. I want to serve out of that directory. So that's basically what that does. So if you do that command and you hit enter, you should see your PHP server is running, and it's running up on localhost 8080. All right, so now we're in the browser, and we're going to actually go to our page and make sure it's up and running. So localhost 8080/info.php. And if everything works right, you should see a nice information page that tells you about your installation of PHP on your localhost. And one of the things we're looking for is we want to make sure that MySQL I extension is running. And one of the things that you can do to see that, or at least know that it's initializing the configuration for it, is up here in this additional INI area. You'll see right here, it says that it loaded the MySQL INI file. That doesn't necessarily mean it's running. It just means it loaded the configuration. To tell if it's really running, we're going to scroll down to the bottom here, or not quite to the bottom, but about midway down, and we're looking for MySQL I. If you see this extension running with all the parameters for MySQL underneath it, you know that you've got the extension working on your machine, and that we are ready to go and start developing our application. This is just a nice way to really find out where all your configuration files are, what particular PHP INI file was actually used to when you're running your PHP localhost. So there's a lot of information in this, and probably pretty overwhelming stuff, but as you get to be a more advanced PHP developer, you will use this page to find about your particular PHP installation, and it helps out a lot, especially when you're troubleshooting to just try to figure out how to get things up and running and things to get started. All right, so PHP info working, we've got PHP up and running, but what happens if we don't put a file name at the end here? Let's say we just call our localhost without a file name. It basically says it can't find anything. This is the standard PHP message that says, hey, whatever you're looking for, I can't find it. But what is it looking for? It's specifically looking for a file called index.php. Index.php is the default file it will look for if it can't find anything else. If you didn't specify something. So before we actually specified the info.php, now we didn't specify anything, so now it's looking for a index.php. So let's go create an index.php. So we're going back over here. We're going to create a new file called index.php. We're going to have our opening tag here. So what we can do here is we can echo out, say hello world. Let's do that. Yeah. And let's go back to our browser. And if we reload, you can see it loaded up our index.php and spit out hello world. So that's what the default behavior of the when you point the internal server to a directory, it's looking for that index.php if you don't specify a file. If you specify a file, it's going to try to look for that file. So that's all good, but let's go back to our code view here and let's make it do something more interesting. We're going to take that out. We're going to put our closing PHP. The reason why we're doing this is I'm going to add some PHP code later, but right now we could actually even skip that. We don't even have to put any PHP code in here. We could just go in with some HTML5, but we're going to add some stuff later, so I like to make this little block up at the top. But we're going to do HTML5. And this is one of the nice things about VS Code is it has snippets built into it. So now I just did a little shortcut key here to have it spit out in basic template or scaffolding for a web page. So you can see we've got our PHP at the top and our web page at the bottom here. And we are going to just do the same exact thing here. Hello world, right? Doing that same thing. So now I saved it, and let's go see what it looks like in the browser. So if I reload, it doesn't look too much. It looks like the text just got a little bit bigger. Yeah, because it's using H1. And let's do a view source, and you can see that it's actually building out a full web page and spitting out the hello world inside of H1 tag. So that's working. So the next step that I want to talk about is actually adding Bootstrap to our project so that we can get all the nice styling and everything like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look down the page, and we're not going to do the npm array. That's a little bit more than I want to go over in this particular tutorial. But there is a myriad of different ways of actually loading up and getting this stuff working. But what we're going to do is what's called the CDN way, where we're going to include a link to an external server to get the CSS files. And you can see right here, it has this little, it's very long. You just have to click the copy to the clipboard. We're going to copy it over that. We're going to go back to our code. And just after this file, we're going to actually just paste that in here. And it's pretty long, and we're going to do something here. Format a document. Let's turn word wrapping on real quick here. Word wrap so that we can actually see it. And this is pretty big just for the tutorial sakes, but you can see we added this link in here, and it does all this other stuff. A lot of this integrity and cross origin things like that you don't have to really worry about. Basically, when you use a CDN, which is a content delivery network, it's like a distributed file system where you can get these quick responses to things like the CSS files and stuff like that. For this particular thing for Bootstrap, it's actually got a couple things in here that will make sure that no one fooled around with the Bootstrap CSS file. And that's what this integrity does, is it actually checks and says, okay, here's a checksum and make sure that nobody fooled around with it. But you don't really have to worry about that too much. We're just going to put that in our file, and that actually puts Bootstrap into our. It gives us the ability to actually start using Bootstrap stylings, and we're going to do one new styling here. We're going to add class, and this is just container. Container, and we're just going to save that. We're not really going to do much of anything there, except just save the container. And we're going to go back to our browser window, and if I reload, you'll notice that things kind of moved around a little bit, because there's some styling that goes around saying how wide a page should be, what font to use, all different kinds of stuff. And you can kind of see that we go to inspector, you can see a lot, and this is actually a really nice, cool way of actually looking at something. You can see all these different styles that were actually added to this Hello World H1 that weren't there before. Actually, we should have probably looked at that before I got over here, but this is all Bootstrap actually adding all these styles on there. Not really a lot that you have to look at, but or to concern with, but just kind of know that it's actually adding a lot of styles and things like that. And the Bootstrap documentation is great for telling you how to do things like make buttons look right, make cards, all different kinds of stuff. It's very extensive, but we're not going to cover a lot of that. We're basically going to use just some minimal styling to make things look good. So we're going to turn off that inspector, and let's go back to our code view. So now that we have Bootstrap up and running, we're going to create some PHP code. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to have a title here that's sort of dynamic. So let's create a variable that then but then we can actually use in our HTML down below. So we're going to create a title variable, and I'm just going to call this simple PHP CRUD, and we're going to create a contact list. So contacts, and we're going to do that. And so now how do we get that information displayed into our page? We're going to come down here, and we're just going to say, there's a couple different ways to do it. I'm going to do it the long form way first, and we'll show you that you can actually take and put PHP using the same thing that we're using up here. You can put these all over your code, and we're just going to say echo title. And then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take this same piece of code, copy, and we're going to put it down here as well. We're going to save it. We're going to go back to our browser view. We're going to reload, and you'll notice now up in our bar up top, it has the same title as down here because we're actually using the same variable. So we're going to use we're going to basically build out our first page, and we're going to do some. I'm just going to kind of go through this sort of fast. We're just going to build out our table that will display our information from our database. We're actually going to be working on the R part, the reading part of the database interaction. So this initial page will actually display all the records in our table in a nice little HTML table and have that displayed out to the page. So let's build that. We're going to start with a table, and it's going to have a class of table. This is a Bootstrap class called table, and this is going to make a nice little thing. And we're going to create the head of the table, and we're going to get a tr in here. And this actually adds a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to change some stuff. We're going to put in a first name, last name. We're going to do email. And we're going to actually add one more header. That's what the THs are, the table headers. We're going to do birth date. All right. So that looks good for our head. Let's do our table body. And we're going to do the same thing at TR. And we're going to basically put in some fake data. Test at test.com/td, because right now we're just basically building the look of it. we'll do TD, oops, 2000 or 1999.0101, which is the birth date, and then TD. We have an actions column. The actions columns will have things like a edit and delete button. So we're going to add those in, and we'll just keep those blank for right now. We're going to put some styling around them. So we call them button. We use the Bootstrap button and button primary for the edit, and button danger for the delete. Look at that. And I think that is it. Oh, one last thing we're going to put at the very bottom of the table is an anchor that has classes of btn dot btn primary, and this is, oops, actually it screwed that up for me. Okay, so we're gonna do it the long form way. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't on that. This href, we're just gonna do pound for right now. We'll do some class equals btn dash primary, and this is going to be our add contact form. So saving all that, let's go look and see what this looks like in the browser. So let's reload, and so now you see we have just some nice information, and right now it's all hard-coded and these don't do anything, but we will add the functionality for those as we go through. But right now we're just getting the look. All right, so we have our page looking pretty good. Now let's add functionality to this button. So right now when we click it, nothing happens. So let's go back to our code view. Let's create a new page, new file called add edit.php. And this file will actually handle the adding and editing of our database record. So this is the update. This is the create and update part of the CRUD acronym. That's what this PHP file will be handling. So we're going to go in here and we're going to actually copy some stuff here. Let's go back to this page. And we're going to copy all the way from this H1 all the way to the top. Copy, paste this in here, and then we will take from the body in HTML, copy. We'll come back down here, do body HTML. We'll format this real quick. Format document. All right, so get that over there. So now we got this because we basically want the same kind of structure. We'll save that. And let's see here. We want to change the name to add / edit contacts. I'm going to save that. We're going to go to our browser and we're going to look for add edit PHP. And we'll see that we have this simple add edit contact. Just have a title there right now. So let's build out that page. Go back here to our code. So we're going to start building out our form. So we're going to build out the form. The action we want to leave blank. So if you have a blank action, it will submit all your data back to the same PHP file that created this. So it will basically go back to this add edit file, and we'll create logic here at the top that will say, okay, I know you're adding, editing, or submitting, and it will process stuff and then redirect depending on if there were errors, that kind of stuff, or if it's editing or creating. It will change the outlook of this page depending on how we call this page. Right now, we're just calling it with no parameters. It's just straight blank. So it should now just basically come in here and build out the page for us to build the contact form. So we're going to go div dot mb. Oops, sorry. Dot mb dash 3. That's a built-in thing here with VS Code, and you can see it actually kind of suggests more code for me. We're actually building out. We're using the snippets, the built-in snippets inside of VS Code to make coding faster, and also there's some other functionality inside VS Code that make coding faster with basic keystrokes. So if you see me just typing in a few things and things start to shoot out, that's just VS Code helping me with my coding. It kind of almost knows what I want to do. We want to change this name though to name first. It's a convention that I use. I always put name first and name last instead of last name and first name. It's my preference. You can do it any way you want, but just know when we're creating these records or these, we're creating them with the same name that we're going to make into our database later. So we just basically are creating form fields here. So we're going to do first name. We're going to do here. We're going to do another one for name last. Oops. Name last. Save. Well, actually, said name last. Let's go with name last. We got last name. We're going. We want one for email, so we're going to copy this again. Actually, this is first name. This is going to say last name, and then this one will say email, and this will be changed here to email. So we have first name, last name, and then we have a birth date field, which is this is going to be a little different, but we'll copy and paste it and we'll make our changes here. So birth date, birthday, and this is going to be for birthday. And let's see here. Do we have anything else we're going to do here? We're going to change our input type to date. So this gives us a nice, this forces a date field and forces some validation on that the browser, some validation we don't have to program for that the browser is going to take care of for us. It's very rudimentary validation, so you should always write your own validation on top of that, but this will give us a nice input field. All right, so that's that there. I'm actually just gonna break these lines up real quick so that so we can kind of see the all the code here. And there we go. So we've got first name, last name, email, and birthday. And let's see here. The last thing to do is add in the two buttons. We want two different buttons there. We want a save button and a cancel button. And you can see this one is the button type. We call it a submit, or we make it a type submit. So when you click that button, it's the same thing as clicking a submit button. This one here is a little bit different. We're using the same type of classes to create a button, but we're creating an anchor and saying, I want you to go back to the index page if I hit cancel. So let's go ahead and save this. And then we'll go over to the browser. And we should reload this, and we should see a nice page. So we can see the placeholder text here needs to be changed. So we'll go back over to our code, and we will change that to have the right placeholder text there. Last email, And this doesn't really matter because I don't think it displays, but we'll just put it there just for, oh, I spell it right too. Birthday, save. So now going back over here, we'll reload, and now we've got the right placeholder information in here. So that is the add edit contact form. And as you can see, if we cancel, it goes back. So now what we want to do is make it so when you hit this contact button, it comes back over to, it goes to the contact page. So let's go back to our code, go back to our info here, our index, and let's see here. We want to add something here. We're going to add in add edit PHP. Save that. Let's go back to our browser view. So now if we reload, we hit contacts, we go to the contact phone, we hit cancel, we come back out. All right. So with that in mind, we're gonna briefly touch base on the edit and delete buttons here. So let's go back and look at what those do. Let's go back to our code. So in the code, we notice we have these two things here, and they don't have any URL next to them. We're actually going to use the same for add edit. We're going to do the same thing, and we're going to add something here later to help us know which file we're editing. We're going to do add edit there, and then on the delete, we're just going to make a delete.php. We haven't created the delete.php yet, and we'll do that here in a second. Create a new file, delete.php. All right, in the delete.php, we're going to add in PHP, and we're going to just put a location PHP index. I'm sorry, index.php. And what this does is it just basically redirects back to the index page. So if we go look at the browser, we can see that this is all wired up here. It's doing that, it's doing its thing. And we hit delete. It's not doing, you can see at the top, it's loading the page again, but it's not, it's basically just loading and redirecting back to the index page. So the shell is there. So we'll move on to the next step. All right, so let's create the database now. So right now I have MySQL Workbench open, and on this side is the schemas that I have on my machine. I am going to create a new database. So these databases are a new schema. We're going to create a new database. So you can come over here in this query window and execute pretty much any query you want. And I'm actually going to say create database PHP CRUD. So that's the database that we're going to be using for this particular application. I hit the little exclamation point, and if everything goes right, we're going to refresh over here. We have this PHP CRUD database. I double click it, you'll see it bolds it up. That means now any queries that I run in the query box over here will be for that particular database. So we're going to create a table, and we're going to just go over. Just going to paste it in here, and then we'll step through everything here. So I'm basically saying create table, and we're going to create this context table. I create this ID of a value of an int. Int is an integer, and this is basically very good practice to have an incrementing number or something that indexes all your records. So typically you do an ID, you say it's an int, you say it's not null, and you use this auto increment command after here. And that basically tells it, hey, the first record I put in, it's going to be 1. The next record will be 2. The next record after that will be 3, and so forth. So it keeps an internal count or internal index of all the records that we're adding in here. So typically it's adding an ID field is the first thing you do on any of the contacts. Or I'm sorry, any of the tables. The next we're going to have my name first, varchar 64. The varchar means that it's a variable character length, and 64 means 64 characters long. You can actually do also what's called a char, but the difference between a varchar and a char is that a char will always allocate 64 or whatever you said, whatever this number is, it'll always allocate that much space in the record no matter what. So put, if you have one letter, it'll be one letter with 63 spaces. What a varchar does, it says, okay, if I want one letter, only store one letter. If I want 20 letters, only store 20 letters, but don't go over this 64 amount. So varchars are very typical, used for things that have a variable character length. And chars are used for things that you want to have a more strict, like it needs to be 16 characters long. So then we say they're not null, meaning that when I insert the record into the database, I have to put name first, name last. Everything else is optional, but name first, name last are not null, which means that they cannot be stored in the database as a null item. Null being just blank. The next is to have an email. It's a varchar of 255, and I don't have any not null. It can be a null. And then we have birth date down here, which uses a date field. And dates in MySQL are stored as the 4-digit year dash 2-digit month dash 2-digit day. So it's kind of convenient. There's a lot of functionality inside of MySQL to manipulate dates and do things like that, but that's kind of beyond this tutorial. But these are very typical things that you would find in a database: an int, a varchar, dates. Some of the other stuff you might find is something like a float. So an integer can't have a decimal point, so it can't be like 3.5, but you'll use something like a float so you can have that decimal point in there. So you can do like something 3.5 or have some more precise data in there. Or if you're working with money, you can, you have pennies or fractions of denominations in your database. This one last thing here, primary key, this says, hey, I want this ID field to be the primary index for all these records going in there. And having, you always want to have some sort of primary key, unique identifier for every record that you put in your database. There is possibilities to make databases that don't have it, but it makes pulling stuff out of the database a lot easier when you have the uniqueness of something in your database. And this is pretty simple. This is all we're going to have in our database. It covers all the fields that we have: first name, last name, email, and birthday. So we're going to go up here and we're just going to select it all and execute it. And if we refresh, we will see that we have the contacts table. And if we go in here and we look at it, it doesn't have anything in there. It just has, it's blank right now. But that's all we need to do to get the database up and running. Now we'll go back to PHP, connect up to the database, and then connect all our pages up and see how we can get this project to work. All right, so we have all of our pages built, but they're not pulling from the database. This is just dummy data that we put in there. The edits, they don't do anything. It's not like when I hit edit, it's not pulling in the data. I can't save new contacts, and you can't delete anything. So let's hook all that up. All right, so we're back in our code, and we're now going to start writing the code to hook our database up. So this is where the app directory comes into play, because we're going to put our database class and all the database connection information in that app directory. And that's not going to be directly accessible by the URL. This will only be accessible through the PHP scripts. So let's go back over here. We're going to create a new file in the app area. We're going to call it database, and we're using a capital D with this, PHP And we are going to do our regular PHP file. We're actually going to create a class. So we're going to create this class called database. And oops, not that. See, don't do that. And then what we're going to do is anytime you create a class with PHP, you should create it in a namespace. And a namespace is just it's for organization. So like it just helps you kind of organize your code. And when sometimes you'll call in a database function that may be in a different namespace, and that will allow you to have multiple different calls in different areas. Um, it's kind of hard to explain it because we're going it's pretty rudimentary with PHP right now. But just think of it as like a foldering system or something to organize your code inside of your project. So we're going to actually create a namespace, and we're just going to call it app. And usually the namespace will start with the directory that you're in, so app, and then so the actual namespace for database would be app/database. Um, and that'll become more clear when we actually start importing it and bringing it um, into the other PHP scripts. So we're going to use the MySQL class, and this is something that's built into PHP because we've included that extension. You can use this MySQL object library to then do things like make the database connection and things like that. And we'll get more into how this is used. And I'm not sure if we tell you the truth. I don't think I'm looking at my stuff. I don't even think we need it. Tell you the truth, we probably don't. So I'm actually gonna remove that. We'll come back to that if we need it. I don't think we do because we're not actually gonna use any of the object oriented stuff for the MySQL um, extension. But that's something you can actually look up into php.net if you want to do things the more object oriented way. We're going to kind of do it more procedurally, but using it inside of an object. So we're going to create our database connection. So the first thing I want to do is create a private variable called dbcon, and this is our database connection. And then we're going to create a public function, a constructor. And we're not going to do this. We're going to do it a little bit differently. So we're creating this constructor, and this constructor will be the first thing that's run when you create an instance of this object. This is kind of anything you see the double underbar. They're called PHP magic functions, and there's a whole bunch of them. Oops. And this specific one, the constructor, gets called when you construct an instance of the class, and that will be more clear also when we start implementing it into the other scripts. So what we're going to do is we're going to add our database connection here, and so this basically this keyword, this with the arrow next to it, refers to our private anything that's in here it's a private. Actually, it doesn't even have to be private. Anything that's in it basically refers to the class that we're working on. So if I want to reference this private variable, I have to use this keyword in order to do that. So I'm assigning this dbcon the MySQL connect, and I'm actually passing my credentials. So it's the URL for the database. Your database is going to have a totally different URL than mine. This is the username, and then the password, and then the database that it's connected to. So we're connecting up to that PHP CRUD database that we created earlier. So that's all that this does, is it creates a connection string. It doesn't do anything, but basically gives a handshake to the database and makes a connection. So one of the first things we want to do is get a list of all of the all the contacts that we have in our database. So we're going to make a public function called getContacts. It's not going to take any variables. It's just going to basically go out and get all the contacts. So we're not going to. This is something that auto-generated, which is fine. Actually, we can look at that, but we're going to probably add some stuff in here. Oh yeah. So basically, what this does is it says, "Hey, go out. Here's the. This actually doesn't do anything but assign a query to a variable. Then this particular thing goes out and says, okay, now let's connect to the database using the connection string that we just set up, and run the SQL, and we'll get a result back. Then this contacts says, okay, go out now that you have this you've ran the query, give me all the results. That's what this MySQL fetch all says. Get everything back and return it as an associative array. That's what the MySQL ASSOC does. Is it says bring it back as an associative array, and then I'm going to return that associative array. So we're going to go up and we're going to implement this particular function call right here. So let's go back to our index, and we need to require that we're going to do something called require once, and typically you don't need to do require once for this because we only have it's a single file that does it. But a lot of times in bigger projects, you may have multiple things that need the database loaded in, or at least the object loaded in, and so the require once makes it so if it's already been loaded in, don't load it in again. And there are occasions where you want to have things loaded in multiple times, but in this case, we only want one instance of this database object, and we only want read in once. So there's another thing you can do called include, and you can do include and include once, but include files are they will give you an error if the file doesn't exist, but they will not error out. With a require, if the file doesn't exist, it will error out. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's go to .app database. So basically we're going to go up a directory, go to the app directory, and require the database PHP file. Then what we're going to say is we're going to use, and if you remember what the namespace, we're going to use the app database. And this basically says, okay, I want to use from the app namespace the database object. And that's what we require. That's what we included up here in the require once. So from there, we're going to go and create a database. And we're going to say it's a new database file. So our new database object. So we're going to create an instance of that object. And now that we created that instance, it's going to run that constructor for us, which is basically a database connection. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say contacts equal the database get contacts. So now go execute this get contacts, run through all that stuff, and return back that associative array that then gets in turn stored into this variable that then we can iterate over. And we'll go through that now. So yeah, let's go here. So now we're going to go down here and we're going to look at all this stuff where we had we had all this stuff that was hard coded in, and we're going to take the hard coding out and actually iterate over that array and put out any information that we have in our database. So what we're going to do is we're going to come here and we're just going to say PHP for each contacts as contact. So basically we're saying for each of the contacts, give me one at a time. We're going to call this, we're going to set one contact to this contact variable. And we're going to iterate that over this whole thing. And we're going to say PHP end for each. So basically every time it loops, it's going to print out this. So for every user or every contact that's in our database, we will create this table, or at least a row in the table for this. So now we just need to go and change these out to saying things like echo contact name first and contact name last, and email. And let's get the last one here. This is birthday. Birthday. All right. So one last thing before we go is now we have an edit, and we want edit and delete to do something with that this particular record, and we're just going to add a little bit of code at the end of each one of these. And basically it says we're going to add this ID, this query string ID, and we're going to use the contact ID, which is that ID field that we created in our database, as the unique identifier of this record. So delete and add edit will both need that. All right, so now we're looking at the database or at the table structure, and we're seeing there's no records here because there are no records in the database. So let's actually do the add next so that we can add a record and then come back and see it listed here on the list. All right, so back here in the code view, we're going to start adding the database to our add edit so that we can actually add something. So we're going to require once the database. We're going to use the app database. We're going to create an instance of the database, which in turn creates the connection. So once you've got that done, we are, if we look down here at the form, we are not giving it an action. So if you don't give it an action, it recalls the same script that actually drew the screen out. So it's gonna basically post all of its data back to the add edit. So we create up a little thing up here, looking for here. We're gonna use another PHP special variable that it's called post, to get all the post data that was posted over to that we filled out in the form and we posted back to this. So we're gonna look at this real quick here, and we just want to start looking at all the names, all the data that was passed through the post variable, and we're going to assign it to variables. So we'll get name first, name last, oops, email, and birthday. So the 4 values that we posted are now going to be put into variables. Using those variables, we do a database add connect. We're going to create this function here. This function doesn't exist in our database, and we're going to create it now. And we're basically passing in first name, last name, email, birthday. And we're passing that to a function in the database object. Then the last thing we want to do is, once that you've created once you've actually added it to the database, we're just going to redirect you back to the list so that you can see it in the list. So now let's go look at the database file here. So we're going to look at the database, and we are going to add a new public function. Oops, not that. Public, sometimes it suggests the wrong thing. Function add contact. and we're going to pass in all those variables here. The first name, last name, last name, or sorry, name first, name last, email, and birthday. Then what we do is we assign an SQL statement that says insert into contacts with the values that we just accepted, and then run the query. So with that in place, we should be able to go over and create something. Let's see. Let's go back to the browser view. And now let's create a test user here. Jack tester at, let's see, Jack at test.com, and his birthday. Well, we can use the little built-in feature here. We're going to say his birthday is, I don't know, 2006, July 18th. Save. And that broke. So why? Why did it break? All right, so one thing I noticed I did and we have to fix here is that the names are still all first name. So we got to change these back to name first, name last, email, and birthday. All right. So with that saved, I think we can go back and look at our fields here. Hold on 1 second. We'll go over to the browser view. Let's go to add things. We're going to say Jack, tester, test1, and the birthday. Doesn't really matter. We're just going to select something. October 7th, sure. We say save. And there we go. Now we can see that we have one record in our database that we just added. So now, now that we have it in there, we want to edit. If we hit edit, the fields aren't listed in here. So why is that? Well, that's because we have to handle the edit. We have to pretty much load all that data back into the form. So let's go back to our form. Good view. So we're in our add edit, and we're gonna add some stuff in our add edit. We want to add all the information to the form to load back up. So as we can see, the values for all these, there's no value, so that we don't set a default value. What we can do, well, let's do something else real quick up top. So before we add those values, we need to load our record from the database. So when we use edit, let's go back to the browser view. We added this little query string at the end, so we knew, okay, we're editing ID1. But what does that really mean? So we have to come back in here and say, okay, the ID, here, we're going to do, I'm sorry, we're going to go down and we're going to load the data up. So we're going to say, if, let's get this, ID equals, then now we use another thing, get ID or null. So basically what this says is anything that gets passed in the query string is actually passed to this variable called get. And I'm going to say, hey, if you did pass something, then set ID equal to this ID that was passed. If not, just set it to null. And so now we can say if ID, so if we say if ID, meaning if there's a value, do something. If it's null or no value, then do something else. So if it has something in it, we're going to go and say the contact. Actually, we won't change the titles like this. That's another thing we could do. But we want to say the contact is get contact. Otherwise, it's just an empty array. So get contact isn't set yet. So if we were to go back to the browser, this should break, yeah, because it's the get contact function isn't written yet. So let's go to our database and actually write that function. Public function get contact. And now that we're using that get contact, we are passing it an ID. So we're saying, hey, get the contact, here's the ID. And so we got to write a little bit of this that says, hey, get the contact. We're going to go select the contact, get the results from the query string and put it in the results, and then set this contact variable to do a fetch meaning make an associative array out of the results and then return that contract. So basically it makes this nice little associative array that puts the field name as the key and the value of that field name as the value. So we're going to go with that, and then this should work here where we're saying get contact. So get contact should now be a nice array. And if we go back to our code view and we reload, let me actually go back in here. All right, pause. All right, let's look at our code real quick here. Go back to the code view. Oh, we spelled this wrong. It should be get contact. Save. And now, oops, let's go back to the browser view. When I reload, I can see that this is getting stuff, but it's still not filling the stuff in. So let's go back and fill it in. So now that we're getting all that information back, in our add edit, we just need to add all the fields, all the values. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, and we're going to say first name. We're just going to put this value in here. Save. So basically we're saying, okay, get contact first. If contact name first exists, then use that variable. If not, just return a null. And so we'll save that, and we'll do the rest for all the other ones. We're just going to copy and paste this down, and this is going to be name last, and this will be email, and this will be birthday. Save that. So now if we go back to the browser view, we reload, now you can see it's actually pulling in the data from the database and putting it into those fields. There's one more thing we need to do in the code in order for it to actually work right and save, is that we need to have a hidden field that actually has the ID in it. So at the very bottom, I'd like to put it in here. We're just going to add this hidden field that's called ID, and it's going to basically say echo the ID. And up here we set the variable here. Up here we set the variable to say, hey, ID equals either the get ID or null. So in that hidden field, it'll either have an ID number or it's going to be null. Then what we need to do is up top here, we're going to load that ID in. ID equals post ID or null. It doesn't have it, but it's always going to have it. But it's good habit to do that. And then what we're going to say is, if the ID exists, we're going to do something else do this. Oops, why does it keep jumping around here? Let's see here. Else do that thing, add contact, but we're going to say update contacts, and we're going to pass ID, first name, name first, name last, email, and birthday. but we haven't created the update. So let's go into the database and create the update. So we go public function update contact, and we actually get all the values: ID, name first, name last, email, birthday, and we run an update command, and then we tell basically the MySQL iQuery to run that update command. So save. So let's go back to the browser, and we're going to cancel out real quick, and we're just going to see here we got this one user. We're going to edit it. We're going to change his email address to it's actually jack@test.com, and hit save. What is this? All right, we hit save, and there we go, jack@test.com. Now it's got the new email address in there. So we have the view, we have the edit, and we have the add contact. Now the last thing to do is to make this delete work. So let's go back to our code. We'll look at it here. So we're going to close all this down. We're going to leave data. We're going to need database, so we're going to leave that open. So we're going to do delete. And so delete's going to have a lot of the same things. We're going to need that require. Require once database, use app database, database equals new database. We're gonna the ID. We're gonna grab that ID. Where's this? Grab ID or null it. And we're going to say if ID, oops, we're always going to want it to come back. We're going to say if ID database delete contact. We don't have a delete contact, so we're going to actually come over here and create it. Public function delete contact. And we're going to ID. And basically we have a SQL that says, hey, delete from contacts where ID is there, and then execute it. So let's go see if this works. So we're going to go back over here, and we're just going to hit delete. And it doesn't work because I forgot to add the button in here. So let's go back here. We've got to, I think my delete here. Let's go back and look at the index and make sure it says delete ID. Oh, it looks like the code actually put a little exclamation which opposites it. So now let's go back over and hit delete, and there it goes, it's deleted. So we can add new contacts, test, 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 test one, create a new, add new contact in here, save it, edit it if we want to. Test@test.com, save. We can actually even change like the date on here, and we can delete it. So that's pretty much it. That is the end of the tutorial. That's all we're gonna do in this particular thing. Hopefully, you've learned something out of it, and this makes sense to you. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next one.